Am I allowed to start? Okay. Welcome to the final event, at least in 2024, that is co-hosted by the Fundación Louis Cunha and the Department of History and Heritage Studies at the University of St. Joseph. For those of you who don't know me, I see quite a few familiar faces here, some of who see me every day in the corridors. I am Priscilla Roberts, and I am head of the Department of History and Heritage Studies at USJ, and I have a whole half person working under me as well, so it's not quite all chiefs and no Indians there. And sitting beside me is my predecessor as head of that department, Professor Dennis Zwev. I've known Dennis for several years because before we both moved to USJ, he was also teaching at City University of Macau, and we had overlapping research interests there. In fact, I think we first said hello to each other when I found you kneeling in front of a poster exhibition that I'd done on the 40th anniversary of City U's history, looking in more detail at some of the wonderful posters that I'd prepared for that event. And so we've been kind of associated ever since. Dennis has since moved back to Portugal, though he is still, I think, heading up the research laboratory for cultural sustainability of USJ in these days of Zoom and instantaneous communication. It's a lot easier to manage those kind of collaborations. And he is a research fellow at ISTE, Portugal, an associate researcher at the Instituto Oriente of the University of Lisbon, and a member of its Urban Transitions Hub. Now, when I was preparing to introduce him, I printed out his CV, and there's 8 pages of it. And since we're already running late tonight, I'm not going to read all those 8 pages out to you. His interests cross a wide variety of areas, including studies of science and technology, environmental studies, urban studies, sociology, visual media, transportation studies, Arctic social sciences, and also cultural heritage and tourism. I will just mention 2 of his numerous publications. In 2018, he published a book-length study on e-bikes in urban China called Urban Mobility in Modern China, the Growth of the E-Bike. And recently, he co-authored a monograph with Gary Bratchford, Visual Sociology, Practices and Politics in Contested Spaces, as well as a special issue of Visual Studies, The Spectacle of the Chinese City, Urban Atmospheres, the Built Environment, and Everyday Practices. Tonight he's going to be talking to us about a site that many of us probably know. I live in Taipei, and I've become very fond of it, partly because it's a bit of green space in the, I won't say quite urban jungle of Taipei. The Yeklong firecracker factory, and it's a throwback to an earlier period of Taipa's history when Taipa was very much more isolated. I was talking to Dennis earlier today, and I said that as late as the early 70s, if you were a businessman who went in for sharp practice in Macau, you were liable to find yourself exiled not to Devil's Island, but to spend 2 or 3 months on Taipa, cut off from the bright lights and whatever of Macau, having to live in rural solitude in what was then a not very large island. So this was even earlier. The firecracker factory is about to celebrate its centenary, I believe, along with all sorts of other places that seem to have centenaries coming up. And so I'm now going to slide out the way and turn the floor over to Dennis.
Priscilla, thank you so much. It's actually a great honor that we're still continuing and doing some studies together. And yes, indeed, there was the conference where we together attended at CTU. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for a slight delay. With this talk on industrial heritage tourism in Macau, I would like to perhaps relate some of the personal experiences of discovering Macau. But also, these are actually results of a study that and so these results of the study I would like to discuss with you and stimulate this discussion about the place, as Professor Roberts mentioned, is really there. It's a very interesting case. It's also one of the sites that is now part of the so much announced revitalization program. And I would like to thank Rui Cunha Foundation again for being supportive and providing this platform to talk to my friends and also share these results on a wider scale. Many thanks to the team. So the title of the talk is Industrial Heritage Tourism in Macau, the case of Yeklong Firecracker Factory. And actually already on the title slide you can see this character, which you might have seen when you were walking on the street Rua Fernão Mendes Pinto, and it's actually what a lot of tourists, and we in this study we actually interviewed quite a lot of residents, locals, experts. For them, this place sometimes was very accidental, and in Chinese this is a kind of accidental encounter. So for me, this was also accidental encounter with the past of Macau. In the 2020, when I first saw this place, I was in the pandemic, Macau. Everybody knows what kind of experience we had. I was wandering around the streets, and some places in Taipei actually were inaccessible. So there was this wall, but there was also, from above, you could see that there is this very dense canopy, big trees, foliage of the trees, and it looked actually quite a big chunk of green space in indeed very highly urbanized, dense urban jungle. Very unusual in Taipei, but also very close to what is sort of cultural tourism hub in Taipei. And of course, this study and discussion that that we had was a collaborative effort, and I would like to thank my colleagues. Actually, one of them, both of them are actually at CTU Macau business faculty, Professor Kevin Hannem, with whom we have done some other studies as well. Jetro Zhao, who was also our colleague, and he's still doing PhD there. But also multiple experts, informal conversants, people with whom who shared insights, who I actually took sometimes on the visits to this site after it was opened. And when it was just opened, it was still very low profile, and to many people it was actually quite difficult to see the entrance from the main street. So I've actually done several years of intensive participant observation when the site was opened since 2022. These were informal conversations, but also visual ethnography. I'm quite interested in doing, using visual methods, and actually one of the results of this was this special issue on the spectacle of urban China, and I will be happy to let you see this and live through this. This is also a collaborative effort with some of my colleagues here. We did an on-site survey, so we actually designed a questionnaire, not a questionnaire, an interview guide. And these 80 respondents were local residents and tourists. And in fact, this study is ongoing. Maybe it's also relevant to say that you actually cannot enter Yeklong firecracker factory twice. It's always different. So it's always changing. There are always some new details added, and I think that's what I mean by a sort of need for ongoing study. So this was actually the simple research question that we posed. Of course, it's interesting to pass by the place, to learn a bit, but we tried to have some kind of a guiding question. What is happening here? What is actually happening? And if this is a tourist attraction, what makes it a tourist attraction? What are the elements that work together? What kind of assemblage and what actually constitutes this new tourist site? Because this was designed to be a new tourist attraction. And so how is it presented by authorities? How is it interpreted? Or we can say done by locals and tourists? So the goal was to identify scope of meanings behind this newly established attraction and to understand how these elements work together, or maybe they constitute this new tourist site. And if this is heritage, how do various actors, if there are residents, if there are locals, how do they actually do it? How do the authorities articulate heritage? How do the common residents and tourists interpret it? What do they actually do and say? That's why we wanted to actually talk to residents, locals, and also it was interesting to see how this site is being now refabricated. And so actually in this special issue, we talk about this refabrication of Chinese city. But also what kind of effects do the new edit, for instance, art displays, what kind of effect do they have? Art installations, for instance. And actually, if you visited the site recently, there were new sculptures added by very famous Portuguese artist, sculptor Bordalo. And earlier there was also, it was a setting for a biennale, Macau Biennale, and installation by Terence Valla, Cloud Garden. So these were some questions that guided this study. And in terms of conceptual ideas, I think there was a very simple idea to see this using the lens of change, disappearance versus renewal, because the first experience, visual experience, when you arrive and you enter the site is that some of these buildings that were part of the production line for firecrackers, they're actually crumbling, they're disappearing, and this is nature taking over as well. And some of the materials that were used, for instance, in this case, shunambo, they are naturally decaying. So there is this sort of friction between disappearance and renewal. Disappearance is ruination. It can be also purposeful destruction of some of the sites sometimes. It can be natural decay, but also oblivion, because the stories that are related with this site, they can be disappearing because people no longer have anything to say about this. And that's, I'm coming to this point a bit later. So this is also a good case of for critiquing revitalization, not just in Macau, but in general. What is revitalization? How can we actually problematize it? And renewal? how are some of the objects in this whole process of renewal appropriate? Are they really appropriate? Should they be there? Yes, sometimes renewal is pronounced as important as its improvement. This is actually a very important word, which you might hear in Macau, that improvement, it's for improvement, it's for making something better. Another idea that I think was quite important is the idea of assemblage. It's about tourist heritage assemblage. It's an assemblage where the borders are not very clear. So there is nature, there is also technology, and I'll show you briefly a slide. What I mean by that, stories, and these are narratives of people who actually had experience of working at the factory, or actually the stories of people who visited this site later when it stopped being the factory. So these are the memories, the intangible elements and human activity, how the things were actually done on site. But also there are very material elements such as ruins. These are the remains of the buildings where different processes for firecracker manufacturing were executed, but there are also trees and creeping vegetation, there are roosts, and also interestingly, some tourists mentioned they also thought that this place was a bit creepy and uncanny, that there were ghosts there, that there were some shadows. In this sense, we can also problematize this kind of border between tangible and intangible heritage, because this is the case where visible and invisible are together at the same time. Of course, it's quite important to give just a brief introduction to economic history, what kind of things were actually produced and manufactured in Macau. And there is a long history of trade, all kinds of trade. Of course, the industry of gambling has been very visible. They were traditional artisanal crafts. Along with shipbuilding, for instance, the firecrackers were considered the three main objects that were produced, along with matches and incense sticks. But also there were porcelain and textiles. Actually, this jacket is made in Macau. And now we also hear that a lot of traditional medicine is being manufactured. So there are actually things that are being made. And firecrackers, of course, they were, and I will come to this, very important cultural artifact. Another part of the context is the tourism economy. Tourism economy that was undergoing this kind of transition and changes during the pandemic. There was revitalization plan announced for the 6 areas, or for 6 concessions to supervise and give these places, or bring them to the former glory, as one of the interviewees mentioned. So 2 of these areas are actually very specific sites, and these are industrial heritage sites, Yeklong Firecracker Factory and Laijavun shipyards. And there are 4 neighborhoods, which are less, I would say, they're not specific sites, they're kind of a set of streets, let's say, and neighborhoods. And so there is this imperative for economic diversification, but also diversification of tourism. And there have been studies regarding the key tension in branding Macau as a destination, where the gaming goes against, or is found in friction with the cultural tourism. Macau is a cultural destination, a destination with rich culture, with rich history. As actually a city which has preserved its cultural, historical center. And so there are multiple challenges, of course, for this sort of revitalization and tourism economy. Land ownership, and I don't go into details because there are many other things, but there's also constant struggle for space. And multiple stakeholder relations. Even in the case of Yeklong, there is actually quite an interesting story how the land was acquired, swapped, and how in the end this was made a decision to have this site with a museum and then a cafe and so on. But also there are some criticisms from not only from experts but also from residents and academics that there are no clear visions of how these things will develop. So there is no content to put in the container. And of course, one of the challenges in this climate is nature. Nature is taken over, and of course for heritage this is one of the major problems, because little crack can destroy the building. A seed goes in, and then we all know what kind of things can happen. And so actually this site has this particular challenge as well. So these were two former industrial sites, heritage sites, Yeklong Firecracker Factory and Light Javun shipyards, and former industrial sites, and they were former industrial sites. They're actually not easy to work on. They're not easy to transform into destinations. They might be ugly. They need to be made safe for the visitors. And at the same time, they can be quite useful for different purposes. We can rediscover our past within the context of the traditional lifestyle. It's also a new tourism site. It's something different. And actually, in case of Macau, I think this is very important, that this sort of redistribution of tourists was very important to channel tourists from the honeypot sites to other attractions. But it also is very important because it can stimulate regional renewal, and unfortunately not all revitalization of industrial heritage is successful. And for success, some of the scholars suggest that we need contents first, and then we can think about the container. It's also very important for this site to be successful. In order for this site to be successful, the historical relevance of things and improvements on this site, should they be there or not? These are some of the ideas that I, well, actually just mentioned. And cultural heritage tourism is also quite important because the built heritage is a way we can engage with history, and there are, of course, potential conflicts between the disciplines of heritage, for instance, and tourism, because they approach management in slightly different ways, and they have different objectives. And tourism, of course, can be a vehicle itself to conservation. It helps to generate income and preserve places, but it's not always successful. Let's go back to Yeklong, or lucky business, or actually profitable business. So Yeklong can be translated in a way as intense prosperity, and it's a very interesting site. Actually, yes, maybe I can show here with the pointer. No. So you can actually see it on the map right there. It's a huge swath of land. It's a huge chunk, huge slice of history, which has this border of the concrete, dense urban residential neighborhoods to the north. And for a long time, it was on paper, this piece of land, and it has this very dense urban fabric. And actually, it's a conjunction of many other buildings. It's not only the factory itself. The village nearby was Cheokha. It's a village where most of the workers lived. And this is the village that I could see, for instance, from the CTU University of Macau. It's a small cluster of low-rise buildings. There is also a temple nearby where the workers could get some classes in the evenings, and there is a school where the children of the workers could go, and they're all on the same street. So in a way, it was a prototype of some kind of a corporation where the factory took care of the workers. And so it's a very interesting story of how these things worked. So it's not only the site of the production facility itself. Actually, firecrackers were not only made on the site, they were made all over the place. It was a family business. Children were involved. The whole families were involved, and they were doing this at home and outside of the factory. Only very dangerous parts of the process were actually conducted on the site. And actually related to this, firecracker itself is a very interesting cultural artifact. It symbolizes Chinese culture. It's related to the tradition of festive noise, warding off evil, but also related to one of the four big Chinese inventions, gunpowder. As one of the interviewees mentioned, it's a great invention and it's a symbol of celebrations. It's in the old days, and still opening of a store, a wedding, they all need this sort of soundscape which the firecrackers can provide, and they're everywhere in Chinese culture. So it's the culture embedded in a single item. Different holidays, different tradition, and it also symbolizes something new or beginning of something new. It's also about auspiciousness. Okay, but it's also a bit of a problematic heritage, or sometimes they call it traumatic heritage. But because of the children labor, and on this photograph, and I will later give a reference to some of these archival photographs that I found, children were used widely, and this was a whole family that was involved in this. And exactly those children, some of them are still alive, and they have these stories, and they have the experience of working on the site. Again, interviewee here provides a very interesting insight about how we can relate to these stories of child labor. And how should we actually perceive this? It was a completely different lifestyle, times were different, small community, and that entirely relied on firecracker manufacture. And this was exactly the time when Taipa was isolated. There were no bridges, and it was this rural community that needed work. The standards were very different. The safety standards were different. Children worked, and there were very many stories that Alfred Lai, in his book, counted. Some of them sad when the children actually had to work, and then they had to go to school, and then during the lunch break they would go for work for a couple of hours at the factory, and then go back to school and then work again. So that was quite difficult life. And accidents happen, of course. Explosions happen. Some children, along with adults, perished. And these are also fond memories. Actually, these are not only memories of hard labor. And I think this is part of this very important narrative of industrial heritage, that this was hard labor in Macau in those days. There was this manual labor. The conditions for work were very hard. There were no air cons. People worked on the street, but they were happy. So some of these elements, let's talk about them a little bit more in detail. Of course, these are memories of the past, as I started to talk about this. And some of them are intangible, but also tangible. In this site, we can rediscover how Taipa used to be, and specifically the memory of geographic transition. That Taipa used to be actually two islands, and there was this canal where the boats would go in, and this is the sign of the canal where the boats were loaded with the firecrackers and they would move out. So there is this feeling of insulation or islandness. And of course, this is a very important memory for some of the younger generation, because the site later, after it ceased to manufacture firecrackers, it was used for war games. So that was a kind of ludic place for some of the young people. So memories, but also materiality is quite important. It's a kind of raw materiality, and when I was talking about technologies, these are simple technologies, of course. We're talking about the 50s, for instance, when there were no aircons, but maybe ventilators. So the specific design of the windows, for instance, was very important to allow ventilation, or the walls. These kind of enclosures were very important to protect from the shock waves if the explosions happened. And you can see this original layout of the factory. And I think this is what makes these two sites authentic, Lai Zhivun and Yeklong, is that the original layout was preserved. If this is now being changed, that's another question, and we can discuss this. After several interviews and several discussions, we also were questioning this idea of renewal and improvement. To which extent things should be renewed and improved? Because also the idea of authenticity, and in many cases tourists are coming to see something original, even though there are also there is a whole segment of tourists who are coming for visual experience. They want photographs, and they want this experience to be shared on social media. And there were different accounts about this problem of intervention. Portuguese expert, for instance, there were different ideas. A Hong Kong expert and academic said, well, Macau is doing a much better job than Hong Kong. Portuguese expert said that actually this is exactly how an industrial heritage site should be, with the minimum intervention, and sometimes you don't need to do anything. You just leave it alone and maintain it, because of course maintenance is important. And for tourists, it was also quite interesting, and here I'm actually referring to a British tourist, because ideas of authenticity are culturally specific, and I think that's a question, it's a topic for another discussion. But what a tourist says is that I wasn't expecting to see this in Macau. And that's actually what many other visitors mentioned, that, well, we know Macau for tourists for the historical center or the casinos. We would never imagine to see something like that. And of course, it's surprise. Again, it's a surprise and rediscovery that things were preserved and they were knocked down. And again, there is criticism of tourists that we need more information. However, there are differences between what tourists want and what locals want from the site. And actually, I have a table. If you're interested, there are more details on the differences along several domains. Okay, let's carry on. I think this is quite an important and actually quintessential element that makes the assemblage in Yeklong. It's a ruin. In Chinese, it's Feishu. And there are actually different Chinese words that the respondents used in describing this. And for them, it was sometimes a puzzle why a ruin is there and why there is no information. But for many locals, this was not a problem, having the ruins, because they had memories embedded into these ruins. And I think actually there is a lot of theorization in social sciences and sociology on ruination and ruins. Georg Simmel, very famous sociologist, actually wrote an essay about a ruin, and he wrote brilliantly that it's the site of life from which life has departed. And it's actually quite interesting also what Tim Edensor does in terms of this research on ruins. He suggests that actually it's a delicate soundscape. The ruins, especially industrial ruins, they're a delicate soundscape of silence, where you can actually hear silence. But also it has to do with romanticism. Ruins and preservation of ruins, it has to do with the romanticism, and in practice, ruins can be quite difficult for the accidental visitors to appreciate and understand. So the value of ruins is different for locals and for tourists. This is sort of a new stage when the site is being complemented, when it's revitalized and when it becomes part of where a human and natural assemblage is much more visible. And actually both sites, and I think it's very important to note that both sites, Lajivun shipyards and the Yaklong factory, they're excellent examples of interface of nature and human activity. And it's also, for instance, very interesting how in Yaklong some of the empty voids between the buildings were occupied by these art installations. And this was part of the Biennale, and this also helps to reconnect with nature and the trees. For many locals, for instance, the trees were very important symbols of rootedness, connection to the place, not only practical providers of shade and green space, but also very important residents of this place. So it's a very important complementary level when the art arrives, and it's a high quality art, and it's appropriate art that comes in here, and it also reignites your imagination and maybe interpretation work. So actually this was quite an interesting discovery for me as well. So maybe visually I would start concluding, and I think this is a very interesting concluding photograph, how locals and tourists do heritage. You can see in the background, of course, the residential towers, but you also see the tree. You'll see locals practicing shadow boxing, qigong, and you have this art installation of Clemens Valla nearby. And this is really perhaps a very interesting image that encapsulates several important features relevant to the cultural sustainability in revitalization of industrial heritage or unused space. It's a new space made safer for people and community to enjoy. Its creativity symbolized by the art installations, but it's also a kind of health infrastructure because it's a green space that is used by local residents. And it's actually quality life for those people who live in those residential towers behind. So to conclude, I think I will just show this table, and I will be happy to share this. There were several domains, and this is based on the survey answers, how people actually do heritage differently. They want different things. And in terms of historical connections, local residents, of course, are connected much more. They know a little bit more. They have the memories. While site discovery is also a different, it's about knowledge, it's about local knowledge. Elements of appreciation can also be quite different because it's an aesthetic domain, and for locals and tourists, these are different things. At the same time, improvement, and in this domain, we were actually asking about what the residents and tourists thought about potential revitalization or management. And actually there was quite a lot of ambiguity in terms of the role of authorities and casinos, but at the same time both groups, locals and tourists, were quite unanimous that NGOs or associations would be quite relevant stakeholders that could contribute to revitalization of these places because they had the knowledge, because they were not profit driven, and they were just more rooted again in this setting. And so some of the concluding remarks, I think it's a very interesting site for rediscovery, going there a couple of times again. And as I said, you cannot enter twice, and it will always be different. It's something close and familiar because it's part of maybe everyday routine and walking, but it's also something that remained visible and uncanny. I mentioned that there are differences between how locals and tourists relate to this space, and they also have different opinions about management options. They have this kind of ambiguity, but as many scholars suggest, heritage is an ongoing process. It's a continuous process of urban refabrication and ongoing enterprise, and tourist landscape is in constant metamorphosis. So where we always have certain new elements, details added to the existing map. And actually, this is the ongoing process of Yeklon being added to the tourist map of Macau. It's very important to understand that Yeklong is actually infused with these memories of the purity of the past, of Macau, small island, rural community spirit, where children are working together with their parents, where sometimes children are actually on the back, participating as well. It's memories of this kind of geographic intimacy where you're on the island, surrounded by water at that time, and you're on the island. And of course, ruins, to me personally, this is perhaps some kind of a more interesting element that I would like to explore in more detail. For tourists, they per se don't have any aesthetic gravitas. They're not really attractive. And as one of the experts actually mentioned, there are so many of these ruins in mainland China. Why this should be an attraction? So there should be a story. And if there is no story behind this, this is not working for tourists. So as an element, it adds to the narrative of spectrality, because for a long time it was a closed site, and there were different stories of ghosts and maybe refugees hiding in those buildings. And actually there was this risky enterprise of fireworks. When explosions happened, people passed away, and actually there were some macabre stories when explosions happened. You can find these memories in this book that I mentioned by Alfred Lai, quite blood-chilling. And of course, this is a narrative of discovery. It's a narrative of discovery that can be utilized in revitalization of the site. I will also mention some of the references, but I think the most important reference here is that of Foreman Harrison, who actually made a lot of photographs in the 1950s, specifically in one of the firecracker factories, not Yeklong, I must say frankly, but these photographs can be found along with many other very interesting photographs of Macau in Digital Photo Archive at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And some of the important references, I think, if someone is interested in teasing out more the role of ruins and the meaning of ruins. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy this. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed, Dennis. I knew we could count on a stimulating talk, and you certainly didn't disappoint. Now, are there any questions from the audience? If I might just quickly start the ball rolling, on the subject of ruins, what is today Macau's sort of quintessential tourist site is, of course, itself a ruin. I don't know what that's. It's a ruin that has changed a great deal, even in the years since I've known it, since the mid-1980s. But it's been a ruin for not quite 2 centuries yet, but almost.
As far as I know, also this is the ruin that remained by accident. Mm-hmm. There were plans not to have that ruin as well, and now it's an iconic site. It's actually an icon of Macau.
Yes, I know. Try to knock it down, and you would have serious problems. Duncan.
Okay, Dennis, thank you for your very interesting talk. My question is, you touched on about tourism potential and that. What would be your suggestions be as to how they could enhance this to make it a modern tourism attraction for both locals but also for people from outside of Macau?
Thank you, Duncan. You mean this specific site?
Yes.
Well, that's actually a very good question. In terms of preservation, I think this is what the Department of Heritage is doing. They're trying to open the site in phases so that we already have access to a relatively safe attraction in the beginning, 2022. And at that time, I think this was, for me personally, this was already enough for the place to be a tourist attraction. And that's why we're trying to ask different tourists and residents what they see or what they really want. And what I understood from the tourist perspective, what would make this even better is more information. Or more actually, what would make it more lively is this kind of engaging elements. They're not very precise. They're not very concrete. How they will engage with tourists, and then that's actually very problematic because if we are to make it into a family-friendly site where there is a children's playground, I don't know how this can work because this has to be safe, but there will always be some kind of tension between its practical use and the history or the historical meanings. So I think if we want to, and actually the locals wanted, actually the locals think it's already enough. It just don't intervene. It's already enough for them to have this green space where they can walk, where they can sit down, where they can now have a coffee shop, which is maybe quite expensive, but still. But they enjoy this place in its entirety of memories and green space. For the tourists, what is important is locating it and actually having a story behind. So the ruins to tourists don't say anything. So probably we can find this balance, telling a story to the tourists, but also keeping those memories alive for the locals.
So how are you going to do that? You kind of talked around it a little bit. Like if you look around the world, they do things like interactive, where people can actually have a hands-on on things, or you have storytelling. You have to tell the stories so for the people that are unfamiliar with it. I know when I first went there, I didn't really know anything about it, and I can agree with some of those comments there. It was unremarkable. There was a little bit about the different things. Certainly I read a lot afterwards and found out more about it, but somehow you've got to bring that to life there for the casual tourist that's going to go there. Aside from the local, I think you can blend both in without modifying it too much, because the reality is it is quite plain if you look at the buildings and that. There's some displays there and things, but it's, for the tourist, it won't attract them if it just stays like that. You've got to bring the stories to life, so then it will become like a functioning place.
There is also a danger that it might become a kind of theme park where there will be performances, live people maybe. Of course, there could be digital, to some extent, digital engagement. But I actually don't know how this can be done yet. Because what I see as art installations, these art installations are actually working. And a certain audience is already engaged with these public displays on site.
Could I step in? I went there a couple of months ago with a bunch of my MA students, doing that instead of a class. And if you go into the little museum now, there are a large number of, there's a map of the place, and then you can press on all the various different bits and pieces to learn more in English, Portuguese, and I think both Cantonese and Putonghua. about the different parts of the factory and what went on there. Some of the ceremonies to the annual ceremonies to drive out the demons who might otherwise cause explosions in the factories. So I think they may have added some of those in the past year or two since I first went there. It's still very much a work in progress. On the other hand, I noticed that they are now rebuilding the far side of the site, and that instead of ruins, you're going to have replicas of some of the buildings. So as you say, it's still very much a work in progress.
And actually, when I mentioned on the photograph this crumbling Shunamba wall, actually, I think it's already sort of made up with new concrete. So it looks safer and it looks solid, while I think originally it should have been left alone as it was. And yes, there was virtual reality attempt, and I think some of my colleagues actually, well, they didn't think very highly of that, but you could hear stories and you could watch some films, like snippets, narratives of people who worked there. So I think it was also only in Cantonese or in Chinese, so there were no multiple languages available. I think that's maybe the future as well. But I think the museum was also quite interesting. It was a small museum.
And they do have classes for school kids now. The room at the end is all laid out with tables that aren't too high, and I think they were preparing it for a class. When I was last there, there were various drawing boards and paper, pencils, etc., etc. I haven't been to any of those classes, but certainly there are some activities going on there. And I think also classes in paper cutting. I don't know if you can actually make firecrackers. It's probably not. We don't really want to start little terrorists here, but various traditional crafts, making puppets, paper cuttings, and that kind of thing, especially around Chinese New Year, I think.
So for educational activities, actually, the place is used quite actively for the school children and artists. Actually, I've seen quite a lot of young artists sitting there and working on the paintings. So at least the space is used also for the for different everyday activities, like people walking around, running, doing Tai Chi in the morning. But these are more local activities. These are not tourists.
But then the locals need their places too.
That's what I said. It should be also for the people who live behind in those towers. It's not only for tourists to pass by and go to the type of houses.
So I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. Sounds like this two extreme of tourists and the locals, they find the common ground, and I'm hearing this common theme is this storytelling, this narrative. In fact, I think one very good example is a very recent TV show about a Shanghai, I guess, night street that was very popular in mainland China. And that TV show actually brought both tourists and the locals kind of love for the location, the filming location. So I think maybe what you're also presenting here is if we're able to tell the narrative such that it's both interesting to the locals as kind of recalling their memories, and also to bring about the story of this change for the tourists. Maybe this is kind of the middle ground. Do you think that might be the way to go forward? That's my question.
Well, certainly, yes. I think that's a good idea. But I also think that just a scholar in tourism studies will not come up with one idea which will work. And that's when I was saying management options. There are associations, local associations rooted here. There also, and that's again, there was not a criticism, but on the opposite, the locals were quite favoring the casino involvement. They said, well, they don't just have resources; they can also, they know how to make things entertaining and lively. At the same time, government should be more responsible. So there are these different stakeholders that will come up with their own ideas, and then there are scholars and locals. To which extent this will be possible to work in Macau,
Yeah, are you aware of this kind of idea competition? I'm also from an association, so very interested in kind of bringing this kind of narrative storytelling in a digital form, perhaps through the metaverse or even simple videos. So, but are you aware of any such kind of effort taking place, either by kind of community as a grassroots, or encouraged by either the resort that's responsible for this place or the government?
not that I'm aware of, but actually talking about the stories, I think also some of my students mentioned this. There are a lot of urban legends in Macau that we as scholars actually don't know. These are stories that are told when they were children by their mothers and maybe grandmothers, and these are something that maybe only locals know. And this would be quite interesting. This Rua de Embaixador, which has a story behind the child abandoned there, and sometimes you can hear in the night that it cries and so on. Maybe there are stories also related to this site. And of course, this requires sort of more, and that's why the historians are needed here, because you cannot just come to tourists and locals and ask them.
Yeah.
There should be work with kind of very deep what was related, and we can also imagine what kind of place it was. Because if we look at the images of Taipa at that time, it's a rice field.
Yeah, I agree. I
And
think
an island.
Yeah, as a local, I would definitely be interested in a story about the humble beginnings of even such a industry that was quite global. The fireworks probably went to all over the world. And so the Macanese people need to look back into this humble beginning. I think that's a very good, interesting memory, even for locals, and a very interesting story for tourists to see as well.
Thank you.
Hello, Professor. I would like to ask, since Macau is a city full of festivals, right? Do you think this site can be involved in one of the Macau's festivals?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, this festival probably can take place there, but it should be a relevant festival. I think it should have a connection. It should have a connection with the site. Well, actually, if you do something with firecrackers, it will have a connection. So I think there was already there was a celebration of New Year there, right, with the firecrackers and the light. I missed it, but I think yes. I think there were also concerts. Some of the concerts. I think this is actually when this is a very common use of industrial heritage for events that don't really distract you from the historical meanings of the place. This could be, for instance, those former electric power plants that are used as exhibition halls, or old stations that are used as libraries, for instance. So I think, yes, it could be an open air stage. It's just, again, the climate question. If it's in winter, in this weather, probably wonderful idea. But will people go there during the summer?
Maybe Christmas? Do you think it involves in some Christmas celebrations or Halloween celebrations?
Halloween? Yeah, maybe Halloween actually would be a great idea.
Because it's about the ghost stories, right?
Did you see the film The Last Time I Saw Macau, which actually the opening sequences are set there?
Ah, no. Or maybe I saw the film, but I don't remember the opening sequence.
Well, it's got one of those war games going on in the fireworks, the ruins. And then apparently somebody is killed either by accident or accidentally on purpose. We're never quite sure. We never quite know exactly what's been happening there.
I think there is a potential here if there was a film. This is what
2016, I think. I've got it. In fact, I was giving it to Antonia on an external hard drive today. I can let you have it tomorrow.
we might have film-induced tourism, because this is what is happening, for instance, in Japan. Actually, in many countries, tourists are trying to visit or revisit the places that were used as film settings. And well, this leads to more people coming to the site. And this is when I think the quality of the site for the local residents again will suffer, because it's rerouting people from St. Paul's ruins to another destination, and again it's going to be a traffic jam and so on. So how can we balance this and sort of leave the locals have their activities there and enjoy the peacefulness? This is actually the question of atmosphere, and for the locals it's the site of peaceful atmosphere. But yes, who doesn't like firecrackers? Doesn't like maybe a festive occasion organized there? So yes, some festivals.
Hello, Dennis. Thanks for your sharing. Just now, I think I listened to a lot of wonderful questions, but I want to ask, because Yiklong Firecracker Factory is somehow like a new revitalization project, and when people face this kind of project, saying, "Oh, we have a new place," we try to put a lot of things inside the ruins or even the park or whatever. We try to put a lot of activities, workshops, installations inside. But do you think this is somehow like a dangers or like a threats for a heritage site that's putting somehow like irrelevant elements inside the revitalization project? Will it be dangerous, or it is like opportunities for the park? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think it's a kind of creative experimentation on one hand, trying to understand what will work with the place. But on the other hand, it's also maybe a bit unplanned, because it's competition. We have to do something so that we display that we are working actively, that we're improving. I think this word is, we have to be very cautious about the word improvement, because does it really improve the quality, the number of activities, or maybe it's one art installation that actually makes the place very relevant? But I think again, maybe it's unfortunate. I don't know. Who will have the final word deciding what will be there? Will it be an association, or will it be a casino that is now actually responsible for the site? I think they should work together. And if they work together, there will be no problem with having too many things, I hope.
Yeah, I totally agree with your competitions, because the 6 areas they are managing by the casinos nowadays. So I do agree that they are competing with each other, performing to the government. We are revitalizing, we are doing a lot of things in the area to somehow to claim that they do the revitalization successfully. But because I heard some of the feedbacks from the visitors and also from the locals, that some of the events, they are totally unrelated to the site. And they think it is a little bit pity, because a lot of tourists go there, and when they went away, they know nothing about the site. They just know about the activities, but know nothing about the site. So this is also what we need to discuss further about what are the curation and what are the planning for the park, instead of we just pushing everything inside to the park. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
that we have had a very interesting talk and also a very interesting discussion. I don't think that we have yet come up with definitive answers to what is the best way to manage Macau's heritage sites, including this one and many of the others as well, but it's certainly given everybody a lot to think about. This is also the last of the joint USJ and Fundación Cunha events, I think, unless something suddenly comes up for 2024. So let me, on behalf of USJ and I hope of the Cunha Foundation as well, wish you all a very happy holiday season. May everything go well with you in the rest of 2024 and for 2025. And I will hope to be seeing all of you again. Well, some of you, of course, at work in the next few days, but all of you in the next semester when we will be planning more events. So a very happy end of the year to all of you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to our speaker and to our hosts.
And we also have drinks and snacks.
Yes, there are nibbles outside as well if we wish to continue the discussion in a more informal way.